Hello, good to be with you, and we're here to talk about climate change, right? The climate crisis, the climate disaster, the climate challenge. Well, I'd like to talk with you about the climate opportunity. What's the opportunity? I think the opportunity is for us to wake up. I think the opportunity is for us to open our eyes, open our minds, open our hearts, open our hands, and actually learn to work together. Because no single country, no single person is going to meet this challenge. So I think the challenge is, I think it's an opportunity, because for the first time, if we don't all work together, we're in real trouble. So I want to talk with you about how we raise our global intelligence. Because I don't think we're going to meet this challenge without raising our global intelligence, which I define as seeing, thinking, feeling, and working beyond borders. Now, my whole life, I realize I've been trying to raise my GQ. I think it probably started with my mother when I was 12. And we were talking about, I was being confirmed in the church, and I asked her, what's going to happen to all those kids in China who don't take Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior? And she said, well, Mark, they're going to go to hell. And I just, it didn't seem right to me. Didn't seem right to me. And I think I was starting to raise my global intelligence even then. Even then I was realizing there's something wrong with that idea. And I think it was the beginning of my time to become sort of interested in becoming an education and interested in becoming a mediator. I found that, everything that happened in my life was basically there to say, Mark, you've got to raise your global intelligence. You have some ideas that aren't going to be able to make this a better world. I remember as an educator, I would often put together workshops. And I put together a workshop in the Middle East for journalists who are Muslim and journalists who are European and American. And we put this event together so that they would start reporting better across this divide between the Muslim world and the Western world. And I'll never forget, a gentleman came up to me and he said, yes, I'm working with you on this. I said, well, hello, my name is Mark. And he said, well, hello, my name is Jihad. And he saw the look on my face. And he said, oh, you Americans, you're always troubled by my first name. And I said, yeah, doesn't it mean holy war? Doesn't it mean like you're going to kill me? And he said, no. Jihad in Arabic means working hard. It means persevering. It means struggling to be your best. So I thought to myself, I better open my mind. I have a lot of ideas that aren't true, that aren't working. So it was a real lesson for me to just sort of, okay, Mark, you've got a lot to learn here to raise your global intelligence. You have some ideas that need to be unlearned. And I experienced that again when I was working for the United Nations as a mediator. And we were working in countries where there was a lot of violence. And I was working with a South African colleague named Hans. And, it was a very strange experience because, it was depressing. There was so much violence. And I said, Hans, how do you keep your spirits up? And he said to me, well, my parents were supporters of apartheid. I and my wife were anti-apartheid activists. My children have as many black friends as white friends. And I may become the grandfather of interracial children. He said that happened all in 3 generations. So of course I'm optimistic. And I thought, wow, that's global intelligence in 3 generations. Look at that change. And as the grandfather of African-American children myself, I know that I've had my eyes opened by finding in my own family all the races of the world. So I ask you, how are you raising your global intelligence? How do we raise our global intelligence? Let's look at that together, because there is no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. And I think that's when I say climate change is going to wake us up, I believe that meeting the climate challenge means meeting Einstein's challenge. I'm sure you've seen this phrase before. He's basically telling us, if you try to solve the challenge of climate change with the same level of consciousness that created it, you will fail. You will fail. So how do we meet Einstein's challenge? And is climate change there to wake us up? I think so, and I think it's really exciting. That's the good news. But there's also some bad news. And the bad news is that we haven't been raising our level of global intelligence fast enough, have we? And that's true not only on the global scale, but it's true right here where we live. in Mexico, in the United States, in North America. It's true on the border. There are people right now who are being hurt, being exploited, and dying on the border between Mexico and the United States. Why? Because we have not created a globally intelligent border. My heart broke when I saw this picture. Perhaps you saw it too. When Oscar Ramirez and his daughter Valeria tried to cross a bridge, they were told they couldn't cross. So they went around 100 yards, 200 yards away and tried to cross the river. That's a death that did not need to happen. That's a death that did not need to happen. We did not need to have this picture in our newspapers. This did not need to happen on the earth. And we need to raise our global intelligence because people are suffering now. Climate change, the climate crisis is happening now. But how do we do that? So I'd like to talk with you about two questions, which is, why is it so important now to raise our GQ? Why now? Why are we sitting here talking about the climate challenge and how to raise our global intelligence? Because it's essential now, but why? And then after we talk about why, I'd like to talk with you about, so how does one raise one's global intelligence? How do we do that? How do you and I do that so that we can meet this challenge of climate change? So that's the journey I'd like to take you on. So let's look first at why. In 1997, geneticists proved that you and I and everybody on the face of the earth are very, very distant cousins. We all come from the same gene pool. We all come from East Africa. So we're the first generation to know that we're global citizens in our genetics. If we took the ancestors of the people gathered here for this talk, our ancestors would come from all over the world, absolutely every part of the world. So our ancestors are global. Our food is global. The food I've eaten today, the food you've eaten today, it doesn't all come from right here. It comes from all over the world. Think about it. Where did it come from? Where did that cereal come from? That milk, those nuts? Our money is global. Even if it's pesos or dollars or yen or euros, it's affected by currencies all over the world. So our money is global. Our possessions are global. I've checked my clothes. They come from Bangladesh, from China, from South Korea, from the United Kingdom. And take a look at yourselves. Where do your clothes come from? My guess is all over the world, just like me. Arts and media. The podcasts you listen to, the internet you go to, the movies you watch, they're not all from this country or one other country. They come from all over the world. Why? Your faith. We're all proud to be Jews or Christians or Muslims, but those aren't local faiths. They've come from all over, across the world and across the oceans and changed over the centuries. So even our faiths are global. And finally, the environment is global. We've all been reading about the polar ice caps. When I grew up, I thought, well, the polar ice caps, they've been there forever and they'll be there forever. And now I open the newspaper and it says the polar ice cap may disappear in my lifetime, and if not in my lifetime, in yours. So we live in the most global time, and we need to start developing our global intelligence to deal with it. That's why it's so essential today. Absolutely essential. But now I'd like to ask you, okay, so I've made the point we need to raise our global intelligence, but what does that mean? How do we do that? How do we do that? What does it mean? What does it mean to open our eyes? Let's take a look. Let's take a look. Nothing is more humbling than orbiting the Earth, because it makes us feel that we have never actually seen the Earth. We actually have never seen the Earth. All we have seen are images of the Earth. All we have seen are maps of the Earth. So our challenge is to, even if we haven't orbited the Earth, to think like astronauts and to realize that we really, opening our eyes means seeing something that generations before us never could see. They could never see the whole Earth. Now, we've always had maps. People have always drawn maps and thought, oh, our maps are, that's the world. No, it's just a piece of paper that we've drawn. And so when we say we've seen the earth, we've only begun to see it. So opening our eyes is actually an act of worship. It's a miracle that we can see the earth. And that's only happened in the last half century, that we can actually see the planet on which we live. No map can capture it because it's so extraordinary. That's the power of opening our eyes. And for the first time, we now have technology that allows us to see around the world. I can see Oscar and Valeria at the Rio Grande. I can see Africa and the droughts. I can see the hurricanes and the typhoons. I can see the fires. I can see the floods in Europe. We can see that all now with our eyes. We can hear with our ears. We can feel the entire planet. That's what it means to open our eyes and open our beings to the fullness of this planet. Now, if we open our eyes, what happens next? Well, for me, when I look at the planet, it starts to open my mind. And I start to see those borders that we've drawn and those identities that we've developed. I start to see how narrow they are. I start to see how limited my own understanding is, the ideas that I carry around in my head. And that's when I wake up and realize I have to unlearn. I have to unlearn. For example, for years I thought, 1 degree centigrade, 2 degrees centigrade, why is that such a big deal? 28 degrees, 29 degrees, 30 degrees, it's not that important. I had such a small mind because it's much more accurate to say, what's my body temperature? It's 37. Now, if it's 38 or 39, I'd better go to the doctor. I have a fever. I'm sick. That's how different 1 or 2 degrees is. So think in terms of your bodies. That's what I mean by opening our minds. We need to open our minds and realize it's a beginning, a new way of thinking. That's what climate change is inviting us to do. And if we open our eyes and open our minds, then I think very naturally we start to open our hearts. It's just a very natural process because we start to feel other people in other parts of the world. We start to feel, for example, I had a book that was translated into Chinese. And so, that same country where my mother told me that all the children were going to go to hell, I suddenly found myself being taken across China because one of my books had been translated into Mandarin. And my friend Chen, who was taking me across the country, became a very dear friend. And every time I'd travel with him, I'd think of my mother. I'd go, I don't think Chen's going to hell. He became a very good friend. My heart opened the same way it did to jihad. So for my whole life, there's been this challenge of can I open my heart to the fullness of creation? Can I open my heart to the fullness of creation? If we can do those things, if we could open our eyes, open our minds, open our hearts, then I think we become capable of reaching out and holding someone's hand or shaking someone's hand, working together. And remember, that's what the astronaut said. He said, we can now, if you orbit the Earth, you see how fragile and whole the Earth is. There's only one way to take care of it, and that's to work together. So how do we do that? How do we work together for the Earth? What does that mean? In practical terms, how do we actually reach across the boundaries that divide us? Well, let's look back at these 4 ideas and be practical about it now. Opening your eyes means practicing looking at the richness of this world and realizing climate change is not it's not a problem we're going to solve. It's actually a challenge that we have to meet by changing ourselves. Now, I'm not the president of a country. I'm not the president of a university. I don't have a big corporation. I'm not a rich person. So where's my power? Where's your power? Well, I think our power begins by opening our eyes and realizing that if we open our eyes, we can take actions on behalf of the Earth that generations before us couldn't, and we can see the impacts that we're having and make changes because of it. I think if we open our minds, we can start to realize, all right, what are the ideas that I have? What are the habits that I have? The way I spend my money, the kind of car I drive, the way I live my life, the kind of house I'm building, the way I vote. How do we change our minds so that we can actually live up to this challenge, the wake-up call of climate change? And that includes people who think different from ourselves. How do we relate to people who think climate change doesn't matter, who disagree with us about climate change and other subjects? For me, that's been one of the greatest challenges. It's realizing we're not going to solve this problem by saying, I'm right, you're wrong. I'm better, you're worse. I'm smart, you're stupid. I'm globally intelligent, you're globally dumb. That's not how we're going to solve this problem. We're going to have to actually learn to open our minds to those people who we think their minds are closed. So it's a tremendous challenge and a tremendous, tremendous opportunity. Now, opening our hearts, for me, I think is the most difficult thing. Because we all live in a world where there's conflict, where there's anger, where there's animosity, where there's hatred, where there's mistrust, where there's been war and violence. And our hearts have closed. My heart has closed. My heart was closed to jihad. My heart has been closed to different people over the course of my lifetime. And we have to now learn how to open our hearts in a completely different way. We have to open our hearts to the earth and feel the earth's pain. And that's extremely challenging because we come from a cultural background where the earth was there for our taking. When Columbus came to this hemisphere, he had the belief that everything was his for the taking. Everything was his for the taking. He could take it back to the king and queen of Spain, and all of it, he was entitled to all of it. Well, that's the culture that built this hemisphere. That's the culture that influenced us. That's one of the things we have to unlearn. The earth was not created for us to take everything for our benefit and take back to our king or to our God. The earth was there for us to bow to, for us to worship, for us to bow in gratitude and say, thank you for our lives, thank you for our existence, thank you for the blessings you have bestowed on us, you blessed earth. So that's what opening our hearts mean, and it's a process that for me is still ongoing. And I'm humbled by it, to be honest with you. I'm humbled by it, and I think that's the greatest challenge humanity faces. But if we can do this, opening our eyes, opening our minds, opening our hearts, I think we can begin to actually work together. And I want to introduce this word that I haven't used yet in this conversation with you, which is the word leadership. We talk a lot about leaders, national leaders, religious leaders, business leaders. We say we want to become leaders. We want to raise students who become leaders. But I ask you to reflect for a moment. It's the leadership that we've had that's led to the climate crisis. So how is the leadership going to be different that solves the climate crisis? How is the leadership going to change? Well, I think the leadership needs to change by having leaders who raise their global intelligence, who open their eyes, open their ears, open their minds, open their hearts. That's the kind of leader that we need. And I invite each of you to ask yourself, how can we become that kind of leader in our own humble way in whatever we do? How can we become that kind of leader? So that begs the question, do you and I have the power to make these changes? Do we have the power, you and I? Yes, we do. We have the power, and I think we have to change what power means. Power doesn't mean how rich we are, and power doesn't mean how big an organization we run, and power doesn't mean how big our house is. Power means, do we have the power to open our eyes? Can we open our eyes? Do we have the power to open our minds? Do we have the power to open our hearts? Do we have the power to open our hands and say, let's work together to care for ourselves, care for each other, and most of all, care for this planet, por la tierra. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.